This is likely to be over 3 minutes, just to warn you. Normally, when I talk vampire folklore, I'm dressed as my character, the vampire Claire Donovan, who is the progeny of the vampire Jack Townsend. More recently, though, I did a video as my other vampire character, Constance Maynard, who is the 9 times great-grandmother of Claire. And it had me pondering something that has me coming to you all as myself. Now, that video was on the subject of vampires in the sun. And it's true that in folklore and in novels like Dracula and Carmilla, the sun does not destroy vampires. They're not going to turn to ash like you see in movies like Sinners. The sun, the most it does to Carmilla in the novel is make her very tired and lethargic. That's it. She doesn't turn into ash. She's just very sleepy. And it is suggested that Dracula is a little bit weaker in the daytime, but once again, the sun does not turn him into ash. But that idea comes from the silent film Nosferatu, and it's a misinterpretation of that scene, because if you pay attention to the dialogue cards, at least in the translated version in English, they specifically say it's the crow of the rooster that will destroy Orlok, not the sun. And people have taken that for years now to mean that the sun destroys vampires. Then again, both in the original silent film and in the more recent remake, Orlok isn't turned to a vampire in the traditional Hollywood sense. He's turned by magic spells and deals with dark forces. Then this is where it's got me thinking. Now, in folklore, there's actually multiple ways to become a vampire. The first one is very standard. You're bitten by a vampire and a vampire feeds on you. You're going to become a vampire even if you survive them feeding on you and you live another 30, 40, 50, 60 years. You're still going to become a vampire when you pass away. And if I may go off on a little tangent on here, this is one of the lore changes I actually like, where they make it into a blood exchange. The vampire feeds on you, then they force feed you their own blood. And that comes from the scene in the novel Dracula, where he's forcing Mina to drink his blood. And by the way, Dracula was never in love with Mina. She was simply a tool for his revenge. There was no love there. Can we please stop these movies? I mean, I loved the Francis Ford Coppola movie, don't get me wrong, but I really would like to see an accurate one where Mina is just a tool for Dracula's revenge. So that idea I like better, because if you're just turning everyone you bite, you basically end up with an explosion of predators and not enough prey. All right. So the whole blood exchange thing, let's think of it as vampire birth control. But the other ways you become a vampire after you pass away in folklore include being one of the following while you're alive: a redhead, a witch, a werewolf. That's right. Werewolves are mortal and they come back as vampires. The seventh son of a seventh son. And I've been asked before what this means. It basically, your father has 6 older brothers. He's the 7th son. And you have 6 older brothers. You are the 7th son. So you're destined to come back as a vampire. The other way is with language censored for this video. You take your own life. You end your own life. You're going to come back as a vampire. That's why people who took their own lives were often buried at crossroads, because they were thought to come back as vampires. Somebody else takes your life in an act of violence, and you will come back as a vampire. You take somebody else's life in an act of violence, and not an act of self-defense violence, but an act of just violence. You're going to come back as a vampire. So probably an example that might offend somebody, despite how long it's been. Jack the Ripper and pretty much all of his victims, except the last one because of how badly she was, you know what, would all come back as vampires according to folklore. And this has me thinking, wait, I almost forgot the one that I find the funniest. If too many people cry for you at your funeral, if too many people are crying for you, if you're so beloved that the whole town is crying for you, The devil's going to bring you back as a vampire as a joke, because the devil finds it funny to make you a vampire because so many people were crying for you. So sometimes you've heard that they've hired people to cry at funerals. They actually hired people to laugh at funerals to prevent you from coming back as a vampire, that if you were very beloved. Anyway, this had me thinking, what if the way you become a vampire determines your weaknesses? Like, now, I know I have dyed blonde hair. I'm not a natural blonde. But when I was a kid, until well into my teens, my hair was very red. I have photos to prove that I lived through the whole carrot top name calling thing of the 80s and 90s. And my hair turned mousy brown by the time I was in my 20s. It looks terrible with my skin color, so I dye it blonde. So I know from personal experience, and this is still true, I do not tan, I burn. I don't tan, I burn. So what if the vampires that are destroyed by sunlight simply became vampires because they were redheads when they were alive? And then obviously they'd still have red hair as a vampire, but what if only redheaded vampires get destroyed by sunlight because redheads are so sensitive to the sun? What if, I mean, it's just something to think about. I'm sure there's other weaknesses people could come up with. The werewolf one, I'm not sure how that would work, because in folklore, you do not need silver to destroy a werewolf. And the werewolf is not, they don't turn by the full moon in folklore. They can turn every night, no matter what the moon phase is. 7 days or 7 nights a week, they turn into a werewolf. So, and again, you don't need silver. You don't need silver to destroy them. They can pass away from any number of means, including just getting old and their body giving out, because once again, werewolves are mortal. Drowning. There are folklore stories about werewolves falling into rivers and drowning. Disease. So remember to vaccinate your werewolf, because a werewolf with polio is a terrible thing. So anyway, that was what I've been pondering, is what if the way you become a vampire determines your weaknesses as a vampire?